Let's get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, you've got some new data on small businesses, and apparently it shows we're in a K-shaped recovery. What does that all mean?
Yeah, it's probably a good place to start. I'm sure most people are familiar with the term of a V-shaped recovery. That's when, I think the good example to think of is the lockdowns. When we went into lockdown, activity rocketed down, and then as we came out, it shot back up. So if you looked at that activity on a graph, it would look like a V. But I think probably, the way a V-shaped recovery takes us all is the same. We all went down and we'll all come up. But on the fringes, there's talk about a K-shaped recovery, and it maybe suggests that not everyone went back up when we came out of lockdown. There are still some industries, like the strands of a K, that are going down while others are going up. So that's where all this letter business is coming from. And this may be a way to think about what's going on with small businesses at the moment, because we've got this new data from the accounting firm Xero, and it shows that revenues for small businesses are up 3.2% on last year. Employment in SMEs, they are up higher than before the pandemic struck, but it's likely being dragged up by the strong performance in the manufacturing sector, because it's not rosy for everyone. And this is where we start to see this divergence, because hospitality firms at the moment are really, really struggling. According to this data, revenue is down 8% on a year ago. Jobs are down 8.5% on pre-pandemic levels. And Xero's managing director here in New Zealand says managers or owners of hospitality businesses in the sector, they're working more than they've ever worked before. There's also that added pressure of not being able to have transient staff or people coming from overseas who work for a couple months at a time. So this is where we start to begin to see this sort of K-shaped divergence begin to emerge. It's probably an effective way, or an effective template to start to think about what's going on in certain sectors of the economy. And sadly for hospitality, there's no real strong sign that things are likely to improve this summer, because with locked borders, we don't have those international tourists coming who are going to be putting their money into our cafes and restaurants and the like.
Okay, you want to talk about the Nissan Leaf. We discussed it briefly yesterday.
And I know you turn your nose up at the Nissan Leaf.
I was just questioning the aesthetics of it.
Yeah, the aesthetic value.
Yeah, worthy as an e-vehicle, but yeah.
Well, look, I want to talk about them today because I'm really interested in their batteries. Now, this is one of the things that's probably less talked about with electric vehicles, and this is the big issues with their batteries, because electric vehicles, the batteries, they actually have a relatively short lifespan. I was recently notified that when a battery gets less than 80% of its original health, the manufacturer has to replace it. And that's usually about 5 years, and that can vary depending on how the person drives or how they charge the vehicle. But just because the battery isn't being used anymore doesn't mean it doesn't have any function. It can still be used. And this is where this New Zealand company comes into the equation. Counties Power, they're a lines company just outside of Auckland. They sort of cover the area between between the Waikato and Auckland and each coast. And they've entered into a partnership with an Australian battery company as part of this pilot to try and repurpose 9 batteries from Nissan Leafs, the electric vehicle batteries. And what they're trying to do is turn them into power banks that could be used as a backup power supply if there was ever a power cut in that area. So you can imagine a situation, small isolated community, huge power cut. Well, Counties Power says these repurposed batteries, you sort of glue them all together, make this one big unit. They could power between 15 and 20 houses for about 2 hours. And get this, they say that these units, they could be reused up to 3,000 times, and it could extend the life of these batteries by 9 to 10 years. The question then is, what happens to the batteries then?
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in this stuff. I find it really exciting.
Because it gives it a second life, and a long second life, as opposed to finding somewhere in the tip for it.
Exactly. And that's probably the concern that we'll have to wait and see, because we're hearing more and more talk about electric vehicles, but maybe less consideration for some of the issues that come with these cars, and also some of the challenges about really how sustainable are they? You've got to think about most of the batteries now in these cars are lithium ion. That's a lot of raw materials you've got to go mine to make those batteries, and they cannot be easily recycled. So it's these other purposes, these second life purposes, that people, or hope maybe the private sector will start to think about to try and give them a second life and really extend their use.
Okay, well, what's been going on the markets today?
So the NZX is up 60 points to 12,889. Our dollar, on the back of those strong GDP numbers, is up to 71 US cents, 94 Australian and 52.6 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News.